The rain had been falling since mid-morning, and by the time Wren came up the track from the village, her boots were soaked through, and her satchel was heavier than she'd intended. She had stayed too long at old Dunn's farmstead. The man had argued about the boundary line for 40 minutes before she'd pulled out her map and shown him the stone marker in black ink, at which point he had argued for another 15 minutes about whether her map was accurate, and then for another 5 minutes about whether she was, which was a new line of attack she hadn't encountered before, and which she privately found impressive in its audacity. She came around the bend in the track and stopped. The woodpile was there. Her woodpile, which had not been there this morning, which had, in fact, been an embarrassingly small and damp collection of unsplit logs she'd been putting off dealing with for 3 weeks, was now a neatly stacked cord of split birch arranged against the eastern wall of her cottage. It was tight, it was dry. The logs were split cleanly, each one roughly the same size, and stacked with the kind of precision she associated with people who had strong opinions about efficiency. Wren stood on the track in the rain and looked at it for a long time. She looked at it long enough that the water had soaked through her second layer before she began to move again, walking slowly into the yard, setting her satchel down in the mud without particularly caring, and crouching beside the edge of the woodpile. The wood smelled of pine resin and something else, something clean and faintly cold, like air at a very high altitude. It was not a smell she could name. It was not a smell she recognized from anything in her experience as a human being living on the southern border of the Eastern Reach. She turned and looked at the yard properly. There was one footprint in the mud. One. It was near the base of the woodpile, slightly overlapping the edge of the stone path. It was larger than any man's foot she had met in the village, longer, narrower, the heel pressed deep and the ball of the foot barely leaving a mark, as if whoever made it had weight only selectively, as if they had chosen to acknowledge the mud's existence at that particular moment and nowhere else. She knew that shape. She had seen one before. In the spring, near the old boundary stone at the edge of her property. She had assumed she'd imagined it. She had not imagined it. She went inside. She checked every window. She latched what could be latched, dragged the heavy oak chair in front of the door that wouldn't quite close in its frame, the door she had been meaning to fix since October, the door she'd been dealing with by means of the chair since October, and she sat down at her work table and stared at the wall. After a while, she made herself tea. After a while, she stopped staring at the wall. She told herself she was not afraid, because she wasn't, and she told herself she did not know what she was instead, because she didn't. She slept with the chair against the door. In the morning, the door opened and closed smoothly on its hinges. She stood at the threshold for 2 full minutes before she was willing to accept this. She ran her hand along the upper hinge where the wood had been splitting from the frame. The wood had been mended. Not replaced, the same wood, the same old oak grain, simply mended, held together by something she could not see. When she pushed her thumb against the joint, she felt the faintest trace of warmth beneath the surface, like a hearthstone 3 hours after the fire has gone out. She put on her coat, walked to the old boundary stone at the edge of the property, and stood there looking at the ironwood trees for a while. The forest looked back at her. She went back inside and made a second cup of tea. 6 months ago, the cottage had smelled of cold air and dust, and the absence of things that used to be here. Her father had died in the 3rd week of winter, 2 years past now. He had died the way he had lived, quietly, efficiently, without complaint, having held on until the worst of the fever had passed through the village, and he was reasonably certain Wren could manage the remaining cases without him. He had done this so thoroughly and with such conviction that by the time Wren understood he was dying, she had missed the part where she was supposed to do something about it. She had not been able to properly grieve him. He would have found grief inefficient. And somehow, the knowledge of this had lodged itself in her chest and refused to move. She had inherited the cottage, the work table, the boxes of border records going back 60 years, and the particular quality of silence that a house develops when it has held the same person for long enough. She had inherited that too. She was not sure what to do with it. On the anniversary of his death, she had done her work all day and gone to bed at her usual hour and lain in the dark for 3 hours, unable to sleep. At some point past midnight, she had gotten up, put on her coat over her nightclothes, and walked to the boundary stone at the western edge of the property. She had found it while resurveying the land boundaries 3 months after her father died. A flat gray stone, roughly knee-height, set deeply into the earth at the tree line. The elves had placed it there 400 years ago as part of the original boundary agreements. They had one on every human property that bordered their land. She had found a reference to them in a border history text she'd picked up from the traveling book merchant. Small stones at the forest edge that mark where one world ends and another begins. And with the stones, apparently, had once come a custom. A human offering, left at the stone, to acknowledge the boundary's protection. Cedar, rosemary, or lavender, tied with red string. Left once a year, on a night of significance. She had not believed the custom still meant anything to anyone. The text had been 200 years old. She had read it on a bad night, 2 winters ago, when meaning had felt like something that required active construction. She had gone out to the stone at midnight and tied a bundle of dried lavender, rosemary, and cedar around the base with a piece of red linen string. She had stood there for a moment in the cold, in her nightclothes and her coat, looking at the dark wall of the ironwood forest. Then she had gone back to the cottage and gotten into bed and had, for the first time in several months, slept through the night. She had mostly forgotten about it afterward. She had not gone back to the stone. She had not known that anyone had been watching. What she would not learn for several weeks was this. Aaron, Lord of the Eastern Reach, had been in the ironwood forest that night. Not for any particular reason. He walked the boundary at night the way some men walked the perimeter of their estates out of habit, and the particular restlessness that comes from having too much time and too little to genuinely occupy it. He had been doing this for 400 years. The boundary stones had been his idea originally. He had placed them himself. He had been standing in the dark perhaps 40 feet from the stone when he heard her coming down the track from the cottage. He had not moved. He was very good at not moving. He had watched a young human woman in a coat over a nightgown crouch at the base of his boundary stone in the cold and tie a bundle of dried herbs to it with red string. He had watched her stand there for a moment, her breath clouding the night air, looking at the forest. He had remained perfectly still. She had not seen him. She had gone back to her cottage. The light in the upper window had stayed on for perhaps 20 minutes, and then it had gone out. He had stood there in the dark and looked at the bundle of dried herbs for a long time. He had read the same border history text. He knew what it meant. He had not expected a human woman in the current century to know what it meant. He had not expected anyone to do this. No one had done this in 300 years. He had untied the bundle very carefully. He had smelled the cedar. He had smelled the lavender and the rosemary, and underneath all of it, the particular human smell of her hands, ink and wood smoke, and something faintly medicinal. He had retied the bundle with great care and gone home. He had come back the next night to see if she had returned. She had not. He had come back the night after that. It had become, without his quite deciding it, a habit. He watched her cottage from a distance, watched the smoke from the chimney in the morning, watched the light in the window at night, watched her come and go along the track with her satchel and her boots, and her expression of brisk and private determination. He watched the door begin to list on its hinge. He watched the eastern fence take damage in the autumn storm, and the panels collapse into the mud. He watched the woodpile not grow. He was 1,200 years old. He had watched mountains form from the movement of deep stone beneath the earth. He had watched rivers change course over centuries. He had watched his own court change, generation by generation, the names and faces shifting around him while the essential structure remained. He had been deciding what to do for 6 months, which, by his measure of things, was not long at all. By the time he finally stacked her firewood, he had given the matter more consideration than he had given to the border treaty of the Western March, which governed 12,000 acres of contested forest. He could not entirely explain this to himself. He had stopped trying. The second time she came home to find something changed. The fence, 3 panels rebuilt in a single night, the work neat and exact. She stood in the yard and said, to no one, "This is absurd." The forest did not respond. She went inside and made a list of everything that needed doing around the cottage. This took longer than she expected, because she had been managing her awareness of the situation by not looking at it directly, and actually writing it down forced her to acknowledge that the number was higher than she had thought. The door. Done. The eastern fence. Done. The loose stone in the hearth. The gap in the roof thatch along the eastern pitch. The split in the lintels above the kitchen window. The gatepost on the southern side that was listing badly after the ground froze and thawed 3 times. She circled the loose stone in the hearth and underlined it. That one was genuinely dangerous. The stone moved when she put a heavy pot on the trivet, and she had nearly gone over with a pot of boiling water twice. She had been meaning to get mortar from the village for 6 weeks. She left the list on the work table and went to bed. In the morning, the loose stone was set. She stood in front of the hearth for a while. She crouched down and pressed both palms flat against the stone. It did not move. The same faint warmth as the door hinge. The residual heat of whatever had been used to do this, dissipating into the cold air of the cottage. She stood up. She looked at the list on the work table. "Fine," she said. She was not entirely sure who she was saying it to. She began to watch more carefully. She was good at watching carefully. It was, in some sense, her professional skill. She recorded things. She noticed the details that told her where a boundary had shifted, where a marker had been moved, where someone was hoping she wouldn't look at a particular corner of a particular field. She was not easy to slip things past. She came home 2 days later to find the roof thatch mended. She had been watching for movement in the forest on her return and had not seen any. She stayed home the following day on the pretext of paperwork and spent most of it looking out the window. The forest looked back at her. At dawn on the 3rd day, she went outside. He was sitting on the top rail of the repaired eastern fence, not standing, not moving silently through the trees, sitting with his long legs folded and his forearms resting on his knees, watching the sun come up over the ironwood tree line as if this were a perfectly normal thing to be doing at dawn on a human woman's fence. He was... She stopped walking and looked at him properly for the first time at a distance that permitted it. Very tall, even-seated. Dark hair with silver running through it at the temples, worn loose. He wore dark traveling clothes, practical and plain, nothing like what she'd imagined elven lords wore. He had the kind of face that would be difficult to estimate the age of, even without knowing he was an elf. Sharp, quiet features, pointed ears visible through his hair. He had not looked up. He appeared aware of her presence in the way that a cat appears aware of a new sound. Not startled, not moving, simply incorporating. She walked to the fence and sat beside him on the lower rail. They sat there for quite a long time. The sun came up. The ironwood trees went from black to gray to the particular deep green that they maintained regardless of season. Not evergreen exactly, but stubborn. The fog burned off the low pasture to the south. Two crows argued in the far field. "Why do you do it?" she said finally. "It needs doing," he said. His voice was quieter than she'd expected and carried a strange, layered quality to it, as if there were two notes playing in the same register. He did not speak with the heavy human accent she'd expected from an elf. He spoke the border tongue precisely and without effort. "That is not a reason. It is a true statement. Those are different things." He was quiet for a moment, a long moment, the kind that in a human she would have read as a pause to construct a careful answer. In him, she had the sense it was simply the pause itself. Actual thought, actual consideration, applied. "No," he said. "It is not the reason." She waited. He said nothing else. She looked at him. He looked at the tree line. "Will you tell me the reason?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. She thought about this. "Are you planning to tell me eventually?" Another long pause. "Yes." She nodded slowly. She looked at the tree line too. The crows had gone quiet. "Your gatepost is going to go in the next freeze," she said, "if you're keeping a list." He looked at the gatepost. He looked at it the way a person looks at a structural problem and calculates the time available before it becomes critical. "I am aware," he said. "Good," she said. She got off the fence. "Don't come into the cottage." She went back inside. That afternoon, the gatepost was reset to vertical and packed with fresh mortar. She did not ask when or how, because she had told him not to come into the cottage, and the gatepost was outside it, and she was choosing not to be unreasonable about this. Millet arrived on a Thursday, which she always did, because Thursdays were slow at the bakery, and Millet maintained that slow Thursdays were made for visiting people who were being foolish in ways that required direct intervention. She came up a track with a cloth-wrapped bundle of seed bread under one arm and stopped in the yard. She looked at the woodpile. She looked at the fence. She looked at the repaired door. She looked at the gatepost, which was newly vertical and packed with dark mortar that hadn't finished drying yet. Then she looked at Wren, who was standing in the doorway, trying to look like someone who had nothing to explain. "Right," Millet said. "Come in," Wren said. "I have tea." They sat at the work table. Millet put the bread between them and began to eat it with the decisive efficiency of someone who was going to ask her questions and wasn't going to be distracted by pleasantries. "The woodpile," Millet said. "Yes." "You didn't cut that wood." "No." "You didn't buy it." "No." "Your hands aren't split from the maul. You don't have a maul. You've been meaning to get a maul for 3 years. 2 years. And the fence? The door?" Wren drank her tea. "Wren," Millet said, with the patient tone she used when she was about to be very patient and wanted credit for it. Something is going on at the edge of your property that I think you should tell me about, because you have the look of a woman who has been not thinking about something very hard for several weeks. I'm always thinking. You're always thinking about everything except the thing that matters, which is different. Millet refilled her own cup without being asked, because she had been coming to this cottage for 12 years and did not require permission for anything essential. Is it an elf? Wren put her cup down. Why would you assume that? Because you live 40 feet from the forest boundary, because the mortar on that gatepost looks like it's set in about 30 minutes, and because I have known you for 12 years, and you have never once accepted help from anyone without a fight, which means either you don't know it's happening, or you're pretending you don't know it's happening, which is a different problem. She broke off a piece of bread. Which is it? I know it's happening. And you're letting it. I'm not stopping it. That's the same thing for you. Millet ate the bread and looked at her with the expression she usually reserved for bread that hadn't risen correctly. What's his name? That isn't, what is his name, Wren? A pause. Aaron. And he's a lord or a king or something. Lord of the Eastern Reach. Millet was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone absorbing a significant piece of information. I know. Does he know your name? I imagine so. He's been watching me for 6 months. Millet set down her bread. 6 months. Approximately. And in 6 months he has... She looked around the cottage, doing an inventory. Fixed your door, rebuilt your fence, stacked your wood, reset your hearthstone, which I notice is no longer going to kill you, repaired your roof, and straightened your gatepost. And the lintels above the kitchen window. Millet pointed at the kitchen window. Wren nodded. There was a long silence. He likes you, Millet said. He fixes things. Wren, those are the same thing. She picked up her bread again. Has he explained himself? He says he will, eventually. Do you believe him? Wren looked at the work table, at the map spread across it, the neat lines of boundary marks, the ink-stained edge of her thumb where she'd smudged a margin 3 days ago. Yes, she said. I believe him. Millet left an hour later, walking back down the track with a satisfied expression of someone who had found out exactly what she came to find out. She looked back once from the bend in the track, and Wren was still standing in the doorway, watching the forest. Millet said nothing. She went home, and she told no one, and she baked an extra loaf of seed bread that Friday, for no reason she would have admitted to anyone. He came at dusk on a Tuesday. She heard nothing, no footstep, no movement. She had stopped expecting either. She simply looked up from her work, and he was standing in the yard, and she got up from the table and opened the door before he reached it. He stopped on the threshold. He looked at her, and then at the room behind her, and then back at her. Come in, she said. You told me not to. I changed my mind. Come in. He came in. He had to duck slightly for the doorframe, which she'd known theoretically, but which was still strange to see. He stood in her cottage and looked at the work table covered in maps, the shelves of herbs and record boxes, the low fire in the mended hearth, the single lamp. The way people look at rooms that contain someone's whole life and understand that they are seeing something private. Sit down, she said. That chair. She pointed to her father's chair. He looked at it. He sat down, and it was the right chair. She'd been right about that. The only one large enough, and even so his knees were at an odd angle. Do you want tea? I do not drink human tea. I know. She put the kettle on. He watched her move around the kitchen. He watched the way she arranged things as she went, pushing the cutting board back to exactly the right angle, straightening the row of jars without thinking about it. She was efficient in the way of someone who had lived alone for a long time and made peace with the shape of their own habits. She brought him the tea. He took it with both hands and held the clay cup and looked at it. "You said you don't drink human tea," she said. "I said I do not," he agreed. He drank it. It was very hot. He didn't appear to notice. She sat down across from him. The fire was low, and the room was quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the ironwood trees at the property's edge, a sound she had lived with for 2 years and stopped hearing. "Tell me about your court," she said. He considered this. "What would you like to know?" "What it's like. Whether you like it." A pause. "It is very large, very old, very formal." He looked at the fire. "I have been ruling it for 1,040 years. Do you like it?" "I am good at it." She studied him. "That isn't an answer." "No," he said. "It is not." He looked at the cup in his hands. "There are aspects of it that are meaningful. The governance of a large territory is not without interest. There are always problems. I am good at solving problems." "And the rest of it?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "The rest of it," he said finally, "is mostly ceremony. Very old ceremony. Ceremony that was meaningful 400 years ago, when the people who created it still attended it. Now it is—" He stopped. He seemed to be selecting a word with care. "Repetitive." "That sounds exhausting." "It is fine," he said. "I am used to it." "Those are also different things." He looked at her. Just for a moment, something crossed his face. A very small thing, brief and controlled, but she caught it. Something that might, in a human, have been the beginning of a smile. "You are right," he said. "They are." She told him about her father. Not all of it. She told him the way she told stories when she didn't quite mean to, in pieces, without looking up. She told him about the record boxes and the boundary maps that went back 60 years, and about how her father had walked every boundary line every spring with a stick and a notebook, and never made a mistake, and about how she had been doing it since she was 8 years old, following behind him, and had eventually done it better than him, and about how he had never once mentioned this out loud, but had, in his later years, occasionally deferred to her judgment on boundary disputes, without making a point of it. This was, she said, probably the highest form of compliment he was capable of giving. Aaron listened. He did not interrupt. He did not offer condolences or platitudes. He listened the way very few people listened, as if the story mattered, as if the details were significant, as if there would be a use for this information in ways she couldn't yet see. "He sounds," Aaron said when she had gone quiet, "like a man who knew what mattered." "He did," she said. "He was better at knowing that than at saying it. Some people are." She looked at him. He was looking at the fire again. The light from it was warmer than the cold gray of the room, and it caught the silver in his hair and made him look less like something from before her kind of history and more like a person sitting in a chair, tired, holding a cup of tea. "He died in January," she said. 2 years ago. I didn't know he was dying until there wasn't time to do anything about it." "I know," Aaron said quietly. She looked up. "You know?" "I was watching," he said. "In the winter." He did not look at her. I saw the lamp burn all night. I saw you in the yard in the morning. He was quiet. I did not know you well enough at that time to come closer. She looked at him for a long time. He continued to look at the fire. You were there, she said. At a distance, yes. She didn't say anything. At midnight, he stood and put the empty cup on the table with the same care he applied to everything he did. He ducked under the door frame on his way out. He turned once from the yard and looked back at her standing in the doorway. Thank you for the tea, he said. He walked back toward the tree line. She watched him go. The chair where he'd been sitting smelled of cold pine and ironwood for 3 full days after that, and she did not try to air it out. The court arrived on a Wednesday morning while she was eating breakfast. She heard the horses first, not 1 horse, 3, and moving with the particular measured cadence of animals that had been trained to convey importance. She looked out the window. 3 pale horses with elven riders, moving up the track from the northern boundary post. Silver and black livery. The rider at the front carried nothing. No weapon visible, nothing ceremonial. But he had the posture of someone who considered his own presence to be announcement enough. She put on her coat and went to the door. She opened it and stood in the frame and waited. The riders came into the yard. The one at the front was old even for an elf, which meant something she couldn't quantify. Silver hair, very pale, with the kind of bitter precision in his face that comes from a long time of having opinions about everything. He looked at the cottage. He looked at the woodpile. He looked at the repaired fence and the new gatepost and the mended lintel. He looked at Wren the way a man looks at a stain on a report he's been given. I am seeking the Lord of the Eastern Reach, he said, in the border trade tongue, with the accent of someone who found the language distasteful, but was willing to use it when necessary. He's not here, she said. Do you know when he will return? She looked at the forest. I don't know his schedule. The envoy, she assumed envoy, he had the air of it, formal and carrying the weight of institutional authority, looked at the woodpile again, then at the fence. He said something to one of the riders behind him in High Elvish, and she caught perhaps a third of it, enough to understand the shape of what was being communicated, not enough to be certain of the specific words. Then Aaron came out of the forest. He had not been there a moment ago. She had looked at the tree line, and it had been empty. He was simply there now, walking across the yard with the particular unhurried quality of someone who will arrive when they arrive, and considers this self-evident. He looked at the envoy. He looked at Wren. He looked back at the envoy. Sirath, he said. Not a greeting, just a name. My lord. The envoy, Sirath, inclined his head. The court is concerned by your absence. The court has always concerned itself with my movements. This is not new. The nature of your movements has become... Sirath paused, with the practiced pause of someone delivering a structured reprimand. A matter of discussion. Discuss it with me, then. Aaron's voice was exactly as it always was, level, quiet, giving nothing away. That is what you are here for. What followed was approximately 6 minutes of High Elvish at a pace too fast for Wren to follow reliably. She caught fragments. Words for boundary, words for concern, words for court and obligation, and the name Aaron repeated twice in a register that suggested accusation rather than address. Sirath's hands remained clasped behind his back throughout. Aaron stood very still, the way he always stood, and said less than Sirath by a considerable margin. And what he said was quieter. At one point, Sirath looked at the woodpile and said something brief. One of the 2 guards behind him looked at the ground. The other one looked at a point somewhere above Wren's head. Aaron said something in return, short and precise. Sirath looked at Wren. Not the way he had looked at her before, not the way he had looked at an inconvenient stain. He looked at her the way someone looks at a thing that has become relevant. Wren stepped out of the doorway. She addressed Sirath in the trade tongue, clearly, without preamble. I don't know what you just said, but you said it on my property, to a guest on my property, while looking at my woodpile. I would like you to know that you are welcome to leave whenever you're ready. You don't need to rush, but you're welcome to. Sirath blinked. Aaron said nothing. He stood perfectly still. There is, Sirath said after a moment, the matter of— You're very welcome to leave, Wren said. I want to make sure I've been clear about that. Sirath looked at Aaron. Aaron looked at Wren. It was a brief look, a fraction of a second, and she could not have said what it contained, except that it was not nothing. We will return to court, Sirath said to Aaron, with the air of someone announcing a strategic retreat while maintaining all available dignity. Your presence is expected by the end of the week. Noted, Aaron said. The three riders turned their horses and went back up the track toward the northern boundary. Wren watched them until they were out of sight. Then she looked at Aaron, who was standing in the yard with his hands loose at his sides, watching the same point she was. What did he say? She asked. The thing that made the guards look away. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Aaron said, that it was beneath the dignity of the Eastern Reach for its lord to work as a groundskeeper for a human woman. She considered this. And what did you say? I told him, Aaron said, that he was on your land and should be careful about what he was willing to say clearly. She nodded. She looked at the woodpile. It was still there, neat and correct, the pale birch bark dry against the cottage wall. Come back at dusk, she said. I want to have this conversation properly. She went inside and closed the door. She built the fire up before he arrived, because it was cold and she was not going to shiver through what she suspected was going to be a significant conversation. She put 2 chairs on the porch, her father's large one for him, the smaller wooden chair for herself, and she sat down and waited. He came at dusk, exactly as she'd said. He sat in his chair. She brought tea. He took it. The ironwood trees at the forest edge were dark against the last light. The sky above the eastern ridge had gone from orange to the particular dense purple that arrives before full dark, the color of something about to become something else. Sirath was right, she said. It is beneath you, from a court's perspective. Sirath's perspective is not mine. Aaron, she looked at him. I want you to tell me the reason, the actual one, not it needs doing. He held his cup in both hands. He looked at the tree line the way he often did, not evasively, she had come to understand, but in the way of a person who thinks better when they are not being watched directly. Do you know what 1200 years is? He said. It was not quite a question. Not really, she said honestly. It is. He paused. Chose. It is long enough to become very certain of things. Long enough to understand your own capabilities with great precision. I know what I am able to do. I have known for a very long time. He shifted the cup. The things I am able to do are large. They are so large that they stopped feeling like choices some centuries ago. They feel like weather, like gravity, like things that simply happen because that is their nature. He stopped. She waited. When your fence fell, he said, I could have brought down the ironwood trees around it and rebuilt the whole eastern boundary in an hour. I have done things like this for treaties, for governance, for the management of borders. He looked at his hands. When I fixed your door, I used very little. The smallest amount of anything I have used in several decades, possibly longer. I fixed a hinge. I straightened a frame. I chose to do one small thing for one specific person, for no reason that could be explained in terms of governance or treaty or the management of anything. He looked up at her. I wanted to do something small, he said. That was the reason. I wanted to choose to do something that did not matter to anyone except the person it was done for. I have not wanted things in that way for a long time. Wanting things requires caring whether you get them, and I had... He stopped again. I had become careful. She looked at him. His face was exactly as it always was, still, controlled, giving nothing away, except that he was looking directly at her, which was not always the case. You left the offering, he said. No one has done that in 300 years. I did not know what to do with it. I kept coming back. He looked at his cup. I kept coming back, and then I started paying attention to the door. She was quiet for a long time. The last of the light went from the ridge. You could have knocked, she said finally. Yes, he said. I could have knocked. You would have told me to leave. Probably. And I could have told you why I wanted to stay, and you would not have believed me, and I would have had to leave, and that would have been the end of it. She thought about this. So instead you fixed my door? Yes. And my fence? Yes. And my hearth? And my roof? And my gatepost? Yes. And stacked my firewood? Yes. She looked at the woodpile, still visible in the failing light. This is the most unusual courtship I have ever heard of. He was very quiet for a moment. Then, it is a courtship? She looked at him. He was watching her with an expression of careful, complete attention. I don't know, she said. Is it? A long pause, longer than usual, even for him. I would like it to be, he said, if that is acceptable. She sat with this for a while. The dark came in fully. The stars appeared over the ironwood trees, and she noticed, as she always did, that the stars looked different above the forest than they did above the open fields to the south. Denser, somehow, as if the trees pulled them closer. You're going to have to go back to your court, she said. Yes. This week? Yes. Will Siroth cause trouble? Siroth has been causing trouble for 600 years. It is his primary function. He drank the last of his tea. I will manage Siroth. You're sure? No, he said, but I will do it regardless. She stood up and took his empty cup and set it on the step. Come back when you've managed him. Here? Yes. Here. She went inside. She looked at the fire for a while. She went to bed. She did not sleep for some time. He came back in 3 days, which was faster than she'd expected. She did not ask what had happened with Siroth and the court, because she had decided she would wait until he told her, and because the expression on his face when he arrived at the yard's edge was the particular expression of someone who has completed an unpleasant task and would like to be somewhere quieter. He had come back. She saw him from the window and put on her coat and went outside. He was stacking wood. There was a second cord taking shape against the north wall of the cottage. Wood that did not strictly need stacking yet. She was well supplied for the coming weeks. But he was stacking it anyway, with the full attention he gave to anything he did. She watched him for a moment. He had not asked her if she wanted a second cord of wood. He had decided she would want one eventually, and had set about providing it, without ceremony and without drawing attention to the provision. She went inside and made tea. She brought both cups out to the yard and set his on the stone wall near where he was working. He looked at it, but didn't stop. She sat on the porch step and held her cup with both hands and watched him work. The morning was cold. The first frost of the season had come the night before and left the grass pale and stiff. The ironwood trees were very quiet. "Did Siroth accept it?" she asked.
"Siroth,"
Aaron said, fitting a piece of birch into the stack with precision.
"accepted that the conversation was finished, which is a different thing."
"Will he come back?"
"Eventually."
She drank her tea. He stacked the wood. The crows came back to the far field, and she watched them for a while, and he watched the woodpile. "You told them," she said. Not a question.
"I told them what was relevant."
"Which was?" A pause. The long kind. He placed another log.
"That I intended to continue coming here,"
he said.
"That this was not open to discussion."
And that if anyone found this beneath the dignity of the Eastern Reach, they were welcome to take the matter up with me in person, at a time I would arrange. He considered the row he'd just built. No one has scheduled a time. She looked at the woodpile. It was going to be a very good woodpile. Tight, dry, exactly right. The kind of woodpile that would last through the winter and into the spring. Built by hands that could have leveled the eastern ridge in an afternoon, with the same care. "You did not need magic for that," she said. He stopped. He looked at the woodpile. He looked at his hands, which were, she noticed and stored the noticing, calloused in a way she hadn't expected. Old calluses, from old work. "No," he said. "I did not." She looked at him. He looked back at her. The morning held very still around them. The frost on the grass, the crows in the far field, the smoke beginning from the chimney. The ironwood trees at the property's edge stood in their ancient quiet. She stood up. She picked up his empty cup from the stone wall where she had set it, and she took both cups inside, and she left the door open. He came in. He sat in her father's chair. She put the kettle on. Outside, the woodpile waited in the cold, tight and dry, built to last. If this story moved you, share it with someone who deserves a quiet night. Subscribe to Elven Crown Stories for a new story every week, and leave a comment. What would you have said when he came back?